The wind cut through Salvation Bend like a dull blade, carrying ice needles that stuck to every surface they touched. January dawn, 15 below, and the frost made everything brittle. Wood, metal, hope. Ruby Caldwell sat slumped against the general store post, small enough that most folks stepped around her without breaking stride. Her dress had been blue once, maybe 2 summers back. Now it was the color of old smoke, patched so many times the original cloth barely showed. She clutched a piece of paper and fingers gone white at the tips, holding it the way a drowning child holds driftwood. The sound of boot heels on frozen boards made her look up. The man was tall, weathered, with a face that had seen more winters than mercy. He stopped 3 feet away, shadow falling across her like a question. "Little Miss Shadowwolves," he said, voice rough as burlap but somehow gentle. "Who are you waiting for?" Ruby's throat worked, but no sound came at first. The paper crinkled in her grip, loud in the morning quiet. Around them, the town was waking slow. A door slammed somewhere, a horse nickered in the livery, the smell of wood smoke drifting from a dozen chimneys. "My mama," she finally whispered. "But she ain't breathing no more." The man's jaw tightened. He'd seen this before, seen it too many times. A child left waiting while the world moved on, pretending not to notice. He pulled a canteen from his coat and held it out. "When'd you last drink something?" Ruby stared at the canteen like it might vanish if she blinked. Her hand shook, reaching for it, and when the water hit her tongue, she had to force herself not to gulp. Manners. Mama had taught her manners, even when there wasn't much else left to teach. "Thank you, sir." "Name's Caleb Mercer. What's yours?" "Ruby Caldwell." Behind them, the store door creaked open. Opal Finch stepped out, broom in hand, and stopped when she saw them. Her face went tight with something that might have been pity or might have been guilt. Hard to tell which. "That's Robert Caldwell's girl," Opal said, directing her words past Ruby like the child wasn't sitting right there. "Mother died 6 weeks back. Consumption. Uncle's supposed to be fetching her, but—" She shrugged, the gesture saying what her mouth wouldn't. "Supposed to don't mean much out here." Caleb looked at the paper in Ruby's hands. "What you got there, child?" Ruby held it up. The paper was heavy stock, legal-sized, but completely blank. Sun and weather had bleached it clean as fresh snow. "Used to have writin'," Ruby said. "Mama's name, I think, and numbers, but the sun took it." Caleb took the paper gentle, held it to the light. Nothing, not even a shadow of ink. "Your mama tell you what it was?" "Said never lose it. Said it was important." Ruby's voice dropped. "Said it was ours." The wind picked up, rattling the store sign. Caleb handed the paper back and made a decision that had changed both their lives, though he didn't know it yet. "You eatin' today?" Ruby shook her head. "Come on, then." The ranch sat 3 miles out, tucked in a fold of land where the wind didn't hit quite so hard. Caleb's horse carried both of them. Ruby perched in front, small enough she barely added weight. She didn't talk during the ride, just held that blank paper against her chest and watched the frozen landscape roll past. The house was fieldstone and timber, built to last. Smoke rose from the chimney. Caleb had banked the fire before heading to town. Inside, the warmth hit like a wall, and Ruby swayed on her feet. "Sit," Caleb said, pointing to a chair by the iron stove. While he stirred the coals and set a pot of water to boil, Ruby looked around. The room was clean, but spare. A table, 4 chairs, a trunk against the wall. And on the table, a leather-bound ledger thick as a man's fist, with careful writing visible on the open page. Caleb ladled oats into a bowl, added a spoonful of molasses, poured weak tea, set it in front of her without ceremony. Ruby ate slow, the way hungry people do when they're afraid the food might disappear. Each bite deliberate, savored. Caleb watched and felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd kept locked tight for 8 years. "Had a daughter once," he said, then stopped, swallowed hard. "About your age." Ruby looked up, spoon halfway to her mouth. Scarlet fever took her, winter of '81. He turned to the stove, needing something to do with his hands. "Name was Lucy." The sound of the spoon scraping the bowl, the hiss of the fire. Outside, a crow called, sharp and lonesome. "Did she die quick or slow?" Ruby asked. The question was brutal in its child honesty, but Caleb didn't flinch. 3 days. We tried everything. Weren't enough." Ruby nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Death didn't wait for children to be ready for it. When she finished eating, Caleb opened the trunk. The smell of lavender and cedar rolled out. His wife Martha's sachets, still holding their scent after all these years. Inside were dresses, small and carefully folded. Lucy's dresses, his hands trembled taking one out, blue calico with white buttons. "Can't have you wearing rags," he said, voice rough. These need wearing." Ruby touched the fabric like it was made of spun glass. "Won't she need 'em? Your Lucy? She's gone where she don't need dresses no more." That night, Ruby slept in Lucy's old bed, under a quilt Martha had stitched 20 years back, and Caleb sat at his table, staring at that blank piece of paper by lamplight, wondering what words had once been written there, and why they mattered enough for a starving child to hold on when she'd let go of everything else. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled, and on the open page of the ledger, a list of names, cattle and horses that had survived the winter, marked with careful tallies. By spring, that list would hold one more name. But Caleb didn't know that yet. He just knew he couldn't walk past her twice. Sunday came cold and bright. Caleb hitched the wagon, and Ruby climbed up beside him, wearing Lucy's blue dress and a wool coat Caleb had found in the trunk. Her hair was clean now, braided careful. She looked like a different child, except for her eyes. Those still carried too much knowing. The church sat at the north end of town, white-clabbered with a bell tower that leaned slightly west. Folks were gathering on the steps, stamping their feet against the cold, breath-making clouds in the air. Conversation stopped when Caleb's wagon pulled up. He helped Ruby down, and they walked toward the church. The smell of wool and mothballs mixed with the pine scent from the garlands someone had hung for the season. People nodded to Caleb, some friendly, some cautious. Ruby they looked at different, curious, pitying. Reverend Morrow stood by the door, a thin man with kind eyes and hands that were never still. "Caleb, good to see you. And this must be—" "Ruby Caldwell," Caleb said. Recognition flickered across Morrow's face. "Lily's girl. Lord rest her. I was sorry to hear about your mother, child." Ruby nodded, but didn't speak. They were halfway through the door when a voice cut through the cold morning like an axe through kindling. "Mercer, hold up." Caleb turned. Vernon Ashford was climbing the church steps, moving with the kind of confidence that came from owning things: land, debts, people. He was 40-something, well-fed, with a face that might have been handsome if there'd been any warmth in it. Behind him, two men Caleb didn't recognize flanked him like shadows. "Need a word," Vernon said. We're headed to service." "Won't take but a minute." Vernon's eyes slid to Ruby. "About the girl." Ruby's hand found Caleb's coat and gripped tight. Vernon pulled a folded document from his inside pocket, held it up. "Got guardianship papers here, legal and notarized. Ruby's my responsibility now. Her mother was married to my late wife's brother, which makes me kin. Court agrees." The paper crackled in the wind. Caleb could see the official seal, the signatures. "That's so," Caleb said, voice flat. "Law's the law." Vernon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'll be by your place tomorrow to collect her, get her settled proper." Reverend Morrow stepped closer, his face troubled. "Vernon, if I might, I witnessed a deed for Ruby's mother, back in '87, for land out by Copper Creek. Lily was particular about it, insisted I use iron gall ink, said it needed to last." Vernon's jaw tightened. "Don't know nothing about that." "Strange," Morrow said mildly. "Lily mentioned you'd been asking about that land, said you'd offered to buy it more than once." The air between the men went sharp. Around them, the congregation had gone quiet, listening without appearing to. "Like I said," Vernon repeated harder now, "I'll be by tomorrow. Ruby's mine to look after, legal and proper. You got no paper, Mercer, no wife, no claim, just an old man playing at charity." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "And we both know charity don't hold up in court." Ruby made a small sound, not quite a whimper, but close. Vernon's eyes flicked to her, then back to Caleb. "Girl needs family, needs a woman's hand. What you think you're doing here ain't natural, and folks are starting to talk." He turned and walked into the church, his men following. The crowd parted for them like water around a stone. Caleb stood there, Ruby's hand still gripping his coat, feeling the weight of every eye on them. "He can't," Ruby whispered. "He can't take me, please." Reverend Morrow put a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "Come inside. We'll figure this after." But Caleb shook his head. "Think we'll head back." Lost my appetite for preaching. Monday morning, Caleb rode into town alone. Left Ruby at the ranch with instructions to stay inside, keep the door barred. The courthouse sat across from the general store, limestone and 2 stories with the territorial seal carved above the door. Inside, the smell of ink and mildew hung thick. A clerk sat behind a tall desk, scratching entries in a ledger. Young man, maybe 30, with the kind of soft hands that had never worked a day outside. "Help you?" the clerk asked without looking up. "Need to renew my widow's grazing permit. Comes due into March." Now the clerk looked up. His nameplate read N. Ashford, and Caleb felt his gut twist. "Mercer, right?" The clerk flipped through a file box, made a show of searching. Don't see your records here. Been renewing that permit 8 years straight. Well, we had a fire last fall. Lost some files." Ned Ashford's face was blank as fresh paper. "Can't renew what ain't on record." "There was no fire." "You calling me a liar?" The clerk's voice went cold. "I'm telling you what's in my files. Or ain't, as the case may be. No record means no renewal. That's how it works." Caleb's hands curled into fists on the counter. Every instinct screamed at him to reach across and grab the man by his collar, shake the truth out of him, but that'd land him in a cell, and Ruby'd be alone. "Vernon's your cousin," Caleb said quietly. "Don't see how that's relevant." "Don't you?" The clerk leaned back in his chair. "You got a complaint, take it up with Judge Harlan. But the judge goes by what's written down, same as me. And what's written down is, no record, no permit." He smiled, thin and mean. "Anything else I can help you with today, Mr. Mercer?" Caleb turned and walked out before he did something he'd regret. Outside, the sun was bright on the snow, the air cold enough to burn. He stood on the courthouse steps and understood with perfect clarity Vernon wasn't just after Ruby. This was about Caleb, too, about something older and deeper than one orphan girl. And the law, the thing he'd trusted his whole life to be fair, to be just, had just shown its teeth. Both of them were invisible now, both of them unprotected. The wind picked up, scattering snow across the street in small, angry spirals. Behind him, through the courthouse window, he could hear Ned Ashford laughing. The livery stable sat at the east end of town, built from rough-cut timber that had weathered to silver gray. The smell hit Caleb before he reached the door. Hay and horse sweat, leather oil and manure. Familiar, honest. Buck Hawthorne stood at the forge in the attached smithy, heating a horseshoe until it glowed cherry red. He was a big man, dark-skinned and broad-shouldered, with hands that could gentle a spooked mare or bend iron with equal ease. He'd been a freedman for 24 years now, but Montana Territory had its own ways of reminding a man that freedom on paper didn't always mean freedom in practice. "Caleb," Buck said without turning around. The hammer rang against the anvil, 3 sharp strikes that echoed in the cold air. "Heard about your trouble." "News travels. Always does." Buck plunged the shoe into the water trough. Steam hissed up, smelling of hot metal and minerals. "Vernon Ashford's been busy. My lease came up for review this morning. Suddenly there's concerns about my operation. Funny how that works." Caleb leaned against the workbench. "He's got leverage everywhere. Man like that collects debts the way some men collect stamps." Buck pulled the shoe out, examined it, nodded. "What are you going to do?" "Don't rightly know. Law says the girl's his. My permit's gone. We're both ghosts far as the territory's concerned." Buck set the shoe aside and turned to face him fully. "You remember 75? When they came after the black homesteaders with those forged deeds? I remember. You lost your place." "Lost it legal. Judge looked at their papers, looked at mine, and decided theirs was more official." Buck's voice held no bitterness, just fact. "Took me 10 years to understand. Law ain't about truth. It's about what you can prove, and proof is whatever's written down by whoever's got power to do the writin'." A horse nickered in one of the stalls. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. "So what did you do?" Caleb asked. "Started over. Built this," Buck gestured at the livery. "And I learned something. When the courthouse won't hear you, you find another way to make proof. You make it so loud and so public that they can't ignore it." Caleb was quiet, turning that over in his mind. "I'll tell you something else," Buck said. "That little girl you got, Ruby, she was in here yesterday with you. Watched her with the horses. She's got her mama's way. Lily Caldwell could calm a spooked animal just by talking soft. Girl's got the same gift. Vernon wants her land. That's what this is about." "Course he does. 160 acres by Copper Creek? That's prime grazin', and it backs up to the rail survey route. Land's worth $800 if it's worth $1. Buck picked up another shoe, examined it. "But here's the thing. If she's got a deed, and Lily was careful about it like the Reverend said, then Vernon's papers don't mean spit. Question is, how do you prove it when the deed looks blank?" "Can't prove what ain't there?" "Maybe. Buck's eyes held something Caleb couldn't quite read. But absence of proof ain't proof of absence. Sometimes things are there, just hidin'. Take this shoe, looks solid, right? But heat it wrong, hit it wrong, and it'll crack. The flaw was always there, you just gotta know how to make it show. The forge popped, sending up a spray of sparks. You got a thought, Caleb said. Got half a thought. But I know someone who might have the other half. Buck untied his apron. Come on. The seamstress shop was tucked between the general store and the land office. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. A wooden sign hung above the door, E-Cho, mending and tailoring. Inside, the air smelled of silk and candle wax, clean and precise. Fabric hung in careful folds along one wall, nothing fancy but quality work. At a table by the window sat Esther Cho, 40-something, with silver threading through her black hair and eyes that missed nothing. Ruby sat across from her, unnaturally still. The blue dress she wore had a torn hem that Esther was examining. Mr. Mercer, Esther said without looking up, your daughter has excellent posture, rare in children. She ain't, Caleb started, then stopped. She's staying with me. I see. Esther's needle moved through the fabric with quick, sure movements. Ruby tells me her mother made this dress. Fine stitching. Your wife taught her well? Her mother, Ruby said softly. Not his wife. My mama. Esther nodded, accepting the correction without fuss. She finished the hem, tied off the thread, bit it clean, then she picked up the paper Ruby had set on the table, that blank piece of legal stock. May I? Ruby nodded. Esther held the paper up to the lamplight, turning it slowly. Her face changed, something sharpening in her expression. Where did your mother keep this? In a tin box, by the window, where the sun came through. For how long? Ruby's forehead wrinkled, thinking. Since Papa died. 2 years, maybe? Esther set the paper down carefully, pulled the lamp closer. In the concentrated light, Caleb could see what he'd missed before. Faint browns staining along the edges, irregular and subtle. My grandmother wrote letters during the wars in China, Esther said quietly. When the soldiers came, dangerous words had to hide. She used rice water, lemon juice, things that would fade or disappear, but they could be brought back. She looked up at Caleb, with heat, or acid, or both. Buck leaned forward. You saying there's writing on that paper? I'm saying there might be. These stains. She traced them with one finger, not quite touching. They look like oxidation. Lemon juice, perhaps. It's acidic. Over time, especially in sunlight, it browns, fades, but the compounds are still there, in the paper fibers. How do you bring it back? Caleb's voice was rough with something that might have been hope. Carefully, Esther met his eyes. With fire, not open flame, that would destroy it, but controlled heat, the right temperature, and witnesses. Her gaze moved to Buck. Lots of witnesses, because once you make invisible things visible, you can't unmake them, and neither can Vernon Ashford. Ruby's hand found Caleb's. Her fingers were small and cold. Outside, the wind rattled the shop sign. Inside, 4 people stood around a table, looking at a blank piece of paper that maybe, just maybe, wasn't blank at all. We'd need a blacksmith, Buck said slowly. Someone who knows heat, knows temperature. We'd need the Reverend, Caleb added. He witnessed the original. We'd need the town, Esther said. We'd need them to see it happen, to know they saw it. And we'd need Vernon to be there. Ruby's voice was small, but certain. So he can't say it didn't happen. The 4 of them looked at each other. An old rancher, a freedman blacksmith, a Chinese seamstress, and a 9-year-old girl with a blank piece of paper and more courage than the whole town combined. March 20th, Caleb said. Hearing set for March 20th. That gives us 6 weeks. Then we got work to do, Buck said. February brought a false thaw. Ice turned to slush, then froze again at night, making the roads treacherous. Caleb brought Ruby into town for supplies, the wagon wheels crunching through the frozen mud ruts. The general store was warm, crowded with morning shoppers. Smell of coffee beans and pickled vegetables, the creak of floorboards under boots. Opal Finch stood behind the counter, weighing out flour for Mrs. Garrett. Caleb approached with his list. Need 20 pounds of flour, 10 of cornmeal, and... Can't help you. Opal's voice was flat. Beg pardon? Can't sell to you. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Around them, conversations had stopped. People were listening without appearing to. It ain't proper. Proper. Whole town's talkin', Mercer. Opal's hands twisted in her apron. Old man, no wife, keepin' a girl that ain't his. You know how it looks. I got a reputation to maintain. I got a business. Ruby stood by the door, small and still. Her face had gone carefully blank, the expression of a child who'd learned not to show when words cut. I see. Caleb's voice was quiet, dangerous. And what exactly do folks think I'm doing? Don't matter what I think. Matters what people say, and they're saying plenty. Opal finally looked at him, and there was something like guilt in her eyes, but not enough of it to change her mind. I'm sorry, Caleb. Truly. But I can't afford to be associated with whatever this is. Mrs. Garrett gathered her flour and hurried out, not looking at anyone. 2 other shoppers followed. The store emptied like someone had pulled a plug. Caleb's fists clenched at his sides. Every muscle in his body wanted to reach across that counter, wanted to make Opal Finch understand what it meant to refuse help to a child who'd already lost everything. But that would only prove whatever ugly thing the town was whispering. Come on, Ruby. They walked out into the cold. Behind them, through the window, Caleb could see Opal's hands shaking as she counted coins. Ruby didn't speak until they reached the wagon. Do they think you're hurting me? Don't matter what they think. It does, though. Her voice was small. If they think bad things, then Mr. Ashford can use that. Can say you ain't fit. She was right. 9 years old, and she understood how reputation worked, how whispers could kill as sure as bullets. Caleb lifted her into the wagon seat. We'll get supplies at Buck's. He won't turn us away. But as they rolled down the street, he felt eyes on them, watching, judging, and he understood with cold clarity that Vernon had been busy, planting seeds, watering rumors, making sure that when the time came, Caleb would have no one to speak for him. The sun was setting when Vernon came. Caleb was in the barn, checking the evening feed, when he heard horses. 3 of them. He stepped out into the yard, and there was Vernon, on a big roan, flanked by 2 men Caleb didn't recognize. Drifters, by the look of them. The kind you hired when you needed something done that wasn't quite legal. Evening, Mercer. Vernon didn't dismount. The men beside him wore gun belts, hands resting easy on their thighs. Not drawing, but ready to. Vernon. Heard you're planning something foolish. Something about fire tests and public spectacles, and Vernon's smile was thin. Thought I'd come by, neighborly-like, and suggest you reconsider. That a threat? It's advice. From someone who knows how things work in this territory. Vernon leaned forward in his saddle. You're playing a game you can't win, old man. I got the law. I got the courthouse. I got half the town in debt to me. What have you got? A blank piece of paper, and the word of a Chinese woman, and a... He stopped himself, but the word hung in the air anyway. Caleb's jaw went tight. Say it. Go on. I'm trying to be civil here. No, you're trying to scare me off my own land. There's a difference. One of the drifters shifted in his saddle. The leather creaked. His horse stamped, impatient. Vernon's face changed. The pretense of civility dropped away, and what was underneath was colder than the February wind. You testified against my father, Vernon said quietly. 74, land fraud case. You stood up in that courthouse and said he'd forged those homestead claims. They hanged him for it, Caleb, strung him up like a dog. The words fell between them like stones. Your father forged deeds and stole land from people who couldn't fight back. I told the truth under oath. That's all I did. You destroyed my family. My mother died the next winter. Couldn't take the shame. My sister married bad and died worse. Everything we had, gone, because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. Vernon's voice was shaking now, rage barely controlled. 15 years I've been waiting. 15 years watching you walk around this territory like you done something noble. So this ain't about Ruby at all. Oh, the girl's part of it. That land's worth money, and I need money. But mostly? Vernon's smile was terrible. Mostly I want to watch you lose something you care about. Want you to know what it feels like when the law takes everything and calls it justice. The drifters' hands had moved closer to their guns. March 20th, you bring that girl to the courthouse, Vernon continued. You try any tricks with fire or witnesses or whatever fool plan you got cooking, and I'll make sure you regret it. I got friends in this territory, deputies, judges, men who owe me favors. You got nothing. You're a ghost, Mercer. You just don't know you're dead yet. He pulled his horse around. The drifters followed. One more thing, Vernon called back. I hear your widow's permit got denied. Shame about that. Means come April, you got no legal right to graze your cattle. Means you'll have to sell 'em off at a loss or watch 'em starve. Either way, you're finished. I made sure of that. They rode off into the gathering dark, three shapes dissolving into shadow. Caleb stood in the yard, fists clenched, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at him to saddle up right after them, settle this the old way, with fists or worse. But that was what Vernon wanted. That would make Caleb the villain. The barn door creaked behind him. Ruby stood there, wrapped in a shawl, face pale in the twilight. "I heard," she said. "You shouldn't have. He's gonna win, ain't he? The law's his, the town's scared, and you—" Her voice cracked. "You're gonna lose everything 'cause of me. Ruby, maybe I should just go with him. Maybe that's easier. For you." She looked so small standing there, so breakable. "If I ain't real to the law, maybe I should just stop being real." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. He crossed the yard in 3 strides, knelt down so he was eye level with her. "You listen to me. You're real. You're as real as anything in this world. And I ain't letting Vernon Ashford or anyone else tell us different." His hands were shaking. "I failed my own girl once. Let her slip away while I was off chasing money and pride. I ain't failing you. You understand me, I ain't." Ruby's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "What if the fire don't work? What if there's nothing on that paper? Then we'll write something new, together. We'll find another way." But even as he said it, standing in the cold February dusk with this child who'd been abandoned by everyone, including the law itself, Caleb felt the weight of impossible odds pressing down. They were invisible. They were powerless. And they had 32 days to prove they existed. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low, the leather ledger open in front of him. The winter count. 8 years of entries. Every animal that had survived the cold marked down in his careful hand. Bessie, red heifer, calved spring 82, survived. Buck, gelding, lame left foreleg, winter 84, lost. Martha's milk cow, winter 81, lost. Each line a memory, each mark a life accounted for. Ruby appeared in the doorway, barefoot, wearing one of Lucy's old nightgowns. "Can't sleep? Mine's too busy." She padded over, climbed into the chair beside him. Her eyes traced the columns of names and dates, struggling with some of the words. "What's this one say?" "Lucy Marie Mercer, winter 1881, fever took her." His voice roughened on his daughter's name. "Last entry I made about family. Couldn't bring myself to write anything else after Martha passed." Ruby's finger traced the letters of Lucy's name. "You got good handwriting. Martha taught me, said a man who couldn't write proper was a man who couldn't be trusted." He turned the page, showing her the livestock entries. "This is how I keep track. Who made it through, who didn't. Honest count. Why? Because somebody's got to remember, even the ones that didn't make it. They were here. They mattered." He looked at her. "Same as you matter, Ruby, whether the law writes your name down or not." She was quiet for a long moment, studying the ledger. Then, "Could you teach me to write proper? You know your letters?" "Some. Mama started teaching me, but then she got too sick." Ruby touched the blank margin at the bottom of the page. "If I could write my name, would that make me real, like these cows and horses?" Caleb felt something shift in his chest. He got up, found a pencil, came back. "Here, I'll show you." He wrote her name slowly. Ruby Caldwell. The letters, neat and careful, the way Martha had taught him. Then he guided Ruby's hand, her small fingers wrapped around the pencil, tracing each letter. R-U-B-Y. Her tongue stuck out in concentration. The R looked more like a P, the Y wandered off the line. But it was hers, her mark, proof she'd been here. "Again," Caleb said gently. She wrote it again, and again, each time a little steadier. By the 10th try, you could read it clear. "There," Caleb said. "That's you, right there on paper." Ruby stared at her name like it was a miracle. "Does this mean I'm in your count? Like the cows?" "Better than the cows." He pulled the ledger closer. "This here's the family section. Or it was before—" He stopped, swallowed. "Before I didn't have family to write about no more. But you got me now, kinda, for a bit anyway." The words were matter-of-fact, but they carried weight. Caleb looked at this child, this stubborn, brave, half-starved child who'd been waiting on a store porch for someone to remember she existed, and felt something he thought was long dead stir to life. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Kinda, for a bit. They sat there in the lamplight, the scratch of pencil on paper the only sound. Outside, the wind had died down. Inside, something that might have been hope was taking root. Ruby practiced her name until her hand cramped, until the letters started to blur together. Then she leaned against Caleb's shoulder, warm and small, and whispered, "If the fire works, if Mama's words come back, will Mr. Ashford have to leave me alone? That's the plan. And if it don't work?" Caleb didn't lie to her. "Then we'll fight harder." "How?" "Don't know yet, but we will." He closed the ledger carefully. "Time for bed, child." She slid off the chair, then paused. "Mr. Mercer, thank you for teaching me my name." After she'd gone back to bed, Caleb sat alone in the dark kitchen, the smell of lamp oil and old wood, the tick of the clock on the mantel, and in his mind, a plan forming, small and fragile, but there. Come morning, he'd need to talk to Buck about temperatures, about how hot iron needed to be to reveal hidden ink without burning the paper to ash. They'd need to practice to get it exact. And he'd need to talk to Reverend Morrow about witnesses, about making sure enough people saw what happened that Vernon couldn't deny it. But for now, he opened the ledger again, found the family section, and in the margin below Lucy's name, in pencil so it could be erased if things went wrong, he wrote, "Ruby Caldwell, winter 1889, survived. Not permanent yet, not inked, but there, a placeholder, a promise." The next morning, Caleb found Esther, Buck, and Reverend Morrow waiting at Buck's forge. They'd come without being summoned, drawn by the same desperate hope. "We got 5 weeks," Buck said without preamble. "Need to make a plan." Esther spread Ruby's paper on the workbench. In the morning light, those faint brown stains were barely visible. "I've been reading. Lemon juice oxidizes when heated. The acid in the paper fibers reacts, turns brown, but too much heat destroys it. We need exact temperature." "Cherry red," Buck said. "No hotter. I can hold that with an iron plate on the anvil, but we'll need to practice." "On what?" Caleb asked. "On this." Esther pulled out a piece of similar paper, already prepared. "I wrote on it with lemon juice 3 days ago. Let it dry in sunlight. If Buck can bring it back, we know it works." They gathered around the forge. Buck pumped the bellows, heating an iron plate until it glowed the color of autumn leaves, not quite orange, not quite red. He set it on the anvil, waited 10 seconds for the temperature to even out, then nodded. Esther laid the test paper on the iron. For 5 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then slowly, brown letters began to appear. Faint at first, then darker. The truth was always here. Buck pulled the paper off, set it aside to cool. The letters stayed, visible, permanent. "It works," Reverend Morrow breathed. "It works on a test," Caleb said. "Ruby's paper's been in sunlight for 2 years. Might be too faded. Only one way to find out." Buck looked at each of them in turn. "But we can't do it quiet. We need the whole town there. Need them to see it happen. Otherwise, Vernon just claims we faked it." "So we make it public," Esther said. "A challenge, in the town square." "The blacksmith yard," Buck corrected. "Neutral ground, not the courthouse. That's Vernon's territory. Not the church, that's God's. The forge is ours." Caleb nodded slowly. "March 20th, dawn. We call him out in front of everyone." "And if he doesn't come?" "He'll come," Caleb's voice was certain. Man like Vernon can't resist the chance to humiliate someone in public. He'll come to watch us fail." Reverend Morrow cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know. About that deed. When Lily had me witness it, she was particular. Said she wanted iron gall ink, the kind that don't fade. I thought it strange at the time, her being so careful. But now—" He paused. "Now I wonder if she knew something. If she knew Vernon was circling." "Iron gall ink," Esther repeated. "That's medieval. It's made from oak galls and iron sulfate. When it dries, it binds to the paper fibers. Even if it fades, the iron's still there. Heat will oxidize it, make it visible again." The 4 of them looked at the test paper, still cooling on the workbench. "So we got a chance," Caleb said. "We got a chance," Buck agreed. "Long as Ruby's mama used what she said she did. And long as the town shows up to witness it." That was the hard part. Getting people to come. Getting them to care. Getting them to risk Vernon's displeasure. But they had 5 weeks. And sometimes, Caleb thought, that was enough time for impossible things. March came in cold but without snow. The ground was thawing, turning to mud that sucked at boot heels and made the roads nearly impassable. The smell of wet earth mixed with horse manure and wood smoke, spring trying to break through winter's grip. Caleb drove the wagon into town on a Saturday, Ruby beside him. The main street was crowded. Farmers picking up seed, women shopping, men gathered outside the saloon trading gossip and lies. Deputy Trent stood on the courthouse steps, arms crossed, watching the street with bored eyes. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in the middle of the square. "You sure?" Ruby whispered. Too late to be unsure. He climbed down, helped Ruby after him, then walked to the center of the muddy intersection. His voice, when he spoke, wasn't loud, but it carried. "Got something to say, if folks will listen." Conversations died. Heads turned. Opal Finch appeared in the doorway of her store, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Garrett paused mid-step. Even the men outside the saloon went quiet. "Most of you know me, Caleb Mercer. Been ranching this territory near 20 years. He kept his voice steady, conversational, like he was discussing the weather. "And most of you know this child, Ruby Caldwell, Lily's girl." Vernon's name hung unspoken in the air. Everyone knew what this was about. "There's been talk about me keeping her, about what's proper and what ain't." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Don't much care about talk, but I care about truth. And the truth is, Ruby's got a legal claim to land out by Copper Creek. 160 acres her mama homesteaded. Problem is, her deed got sun-faded. Looks blank. So Vernon Ashford says it don't exist." A murmur ran through the crowd. Vernon wasn't here yet, but he'd hear about this within the hour. "So, here's what I'm proposing." Caleb pulled the paper from his coat, Ruby's deed, still blank to the naked eye. "March 20th, dawn, Buck Hawthorne's forge. We'll put this paper to fire and see what shows. If there's writin', then Ruby keeps her land. If there ain't, then—" He stopped. "Then I'll step aside. Let Vernon take her, legal and proper." "And if we don't show up?" someone called from the crowd. "If we got better things to do than watch an old man's folly?" "Then Vernon wins without anyone knowing if he deserved to." Caleb looked around at the faces, some sympathetic, some skeptical, some carefully blank. "I ain't asking you to take sides, just asking you to witness. Let the truth be what it is." Silence. Then Reverend Morrow stepped forward from the church steps. "I'll be there," he said clearly. "I witnessed Lily's original deed back in '87. If words appear, I'll vouch for my signature." Esther Cho emerged from her shop, holding a bolt of fabric. "I'll witness." Buck appeared in the doorway of his livery, massive and solid. "My forge, my fire. I'll be there." Three voices, three outcasts, a preacher who'd lost his congregation's respect years ago for speaking against timber fraud, a Chinese woman who'd survived riots and arson, a black man who'd been driven off his own land by forged papers. The rest of the town stayed silent. Then, surprising everyone, Opal Finch stepped into the street. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. "I'll come." Heads turned. Opal, who'd refused to sell Caleb flour just weeks ago. Opal, who'd sided with propriety over compassion. "I ain't proud of some things I done," she said, not looking at Caleb. "But I knew Lily Caldwell. She was a good woman. And if there's a chance, her girl's got a rightful claim." She swallowed hard. "Then I ought to see it approved, one way or t'other." Caleb nodded to her. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. More silence. Then a few more voices, tentative. "I'll come." "Me too." "Reckon I can spare an hour." Not everyone. Maybe a third of the crowd. But it was more than Caleb had hoped for. "March 20th, he repeated. "Dawn. Bring your eyes and your conscience. That's all I ask." He climbed back into the wagon, lifted Ruby up, and drove away. Behind them, the town erupted into conversation. Speculation, an argument, and the kind of buzz that would carry this story to every homestead within 20 miles by nightfall. Vernon would hear, and Vernon would come. That was the gamble. That night, Ruby sat at the kitchen table, practicing her letters by lamplight. She'd moved past her name now, was working on other words: Mama, Papa, home. Caleb was checking his notes, temperatures, timing, the exact process Buck would use. When he looked up, Ruby was staring at him with an expression too old for her face. "What if it's blank?" she asked. "What if Mama's words don't come back? Then we figure something else." "But you promised the town. You said if it don't work, you'd let Mr. Ashford take me." Had he said that? Caleb replayed his words in the square. He'd said he'd step aside, let Vernon take her legal and proper. But legal and proper weren't the same thing, were they? Before he could answer, Ruby spoke again, her voice small but certain. I remembered something. About the paper. Caleb set down his pencil. What did you remember? Mama wasn't alone when she got it. When Papa died in the mine, that was spring of 1887, April, I think. The flowers were just starting, and Mr. Ashford's wife had already been gone a year by then. She died, having a baby, back in 86. So Mama was by herself, just her and me. The words tumbled out fast, like Ruby was afraid she'd forget them if she didn't speak quick enough. Why's that matter? Caleb asked, though something was stirring in his mind. Because Mr. Ashford's papers say he got guardianship in January 1886, but Mama wasn't a widow yet in January 1886. Papa was still alive, so how could Mr. Ashford be guardian of me when Mama still had a husband? The lamp flickered. Outside, an owl called, low and mournful. Caleb stood up slowly, his mind racing. He crossed to the shelf where he'd stashed Vernon's guardianship papers, copies the courthouse had provided, spread them on the table under the light. There it was, clear as day, guardianship granted to Vernon Ashford, January 15, 1886, for Ruby Caldwell, minor child of Lily Caldwell, widow. But Ruby's father hadn't died until April 1887, a full 15 months later. Vernon had forged the date, or gotten it wrong. Either way, the papers were impossible. Caleb looked at Ruby, this 9-year-old child who'd just handed him a weapon Vernon couldn't defend against. You sure about the dates? He asked carefully. Yes, sir. Mama told me stories about Papa. Said he died when the columbines were bloomin'. That's April. And she said Mrs. Ashford's funeral was the winter before. Said the ground was frozen so hard they had to wait 3 days to dig the grave. 2 proofs now. If the fire test showed Lily's deed dated 1887 and Vernon's guardianship claimed 1886, then Vernon's papers were fraudulent. The dates didn't line up. Ruby, Caleb said quietly, you just might have won this fight. She looked at him with those 2 old eyes. Will the town believe me? A child's memory against Mr. Ashford's legal papers? That was the question, wasn't it? A 9-year-old's recollection versus official documents with seals and signatures? They'll believe you if there's proof, Caleb said. And if Reverend Morrow remembers the date he witnessed that deed, if it matches what you remember, then Vernon can't explain why he claimed guardianship before your mama was even widowed. Ruby's face brightened for the first time in weeks. Not quite hope. She'd learned to be cautious with hope, but something close to it. So we got him? We got a chance at him, which is more than we had this morning. Outside, the mud was freezing again as night deepened, but inside, by lamplight, 2 people who'd been invisible were starting to become real, starting to write themselves back into existence, one careful letter at a time. March 20th was 17 days away, 17 days to make the impossible visible. The church was half empty on Sunday. Caleb noticed it the moment he and Ruby walked in. Empty pews where families usually sat, gaps like missing teeth. The Harrisons weren't there, the Carters, the Williamson brothers who ran the feed store. Reverend Morrow stood at the pulpit, his face drawn. He began the service with a hymn, but only a handful of voices joined in. The sound echoed hollow in the wooden building, lost in too much space. After the benediction, as people filed out, Caleb approached the Reverend. Where is everyone? Morrow's smile was tired. Vernon's been busy, making visits, reminding folks who holds their loans, who controls the rail contracts, who has influence with the territorial judge. He set his hymnal down carefully. Some people have too much to lose, Caleb. Can't fault them for that. Can't I? You can, but it won't change anything. Morrow looked past him to where Ruby sat on a pew, swinging her legs. I've been thinking about that deed, about the date. I witnessed it April 12th, 1887. I'm certain of that because it was 3 days after the mine collapse that killed Robert Caldwell. Lily came to me while she was still in mourning blacks. You'd swear to that in front of the town? I'd swear to it in front of God and Vernon both. Morrow's voice hardened. But Caleb, I might be the only one willing to stand up there with you. The others who said they'd come, they're having second thoughts. The words landed like stones in still water. How many? Opal Finch withdrew this morning, said she can't risk her store. The Mitchells, the Coreys, Vernon holds paper on their land. They're scared, Caleb, scared enough to stay away. Ruby appeared at Caleb's elbow, listening. Her face showed nothing, but her hands were balled into fists. What about Buck? Caleb asked. Buck's solid. Esther too, but that's it. 4 of us, maybe 5 if Deputy Trent shows up on his own accord. Morrow looked tired, older than his years. Vernon's got this town wrapped around his finger, and he's squeezing. That evening, Caleb called a meeting at Buck's forge. The 4 of them gathered around the workbench. Caleb, Ruby, Buck, and Esther. Reverend Morrow had stayed behind to counsel a dying woman 2 miles out of town. "Town's scared," Caleb said without preamble. "Most of who said they'd come are backing out." Buck nodded grimly. "Vernon came by my place yesterday. Didn't threaten direct, just mentioned how my lease is up for renewal in June. How it'd be a shame if complications arose." He tested the edge of a horseshoe file against his thumb. "Man's got reach." "He came to me too," Esther said quietly. "Reminded me that the anti-Chinese ordinances are still on the books in some counties, that there's talk of expanding them, that friends in the territorial government could make my life difficult." Ruby's voice was small. "This is my fault." "No," Caleb said sharply. "This is Vernon's doing, and our choice to fight it. But if nobody comes, if it's just us 4, then it don't matter what the fire shows. Vernon'll say we made it up, say we tricked folks." Ruby's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Maybe I should just go with him, end this." "You keep saying that," Buck said, his voice gentle but firm. "And I keep wondering, why's a 9-year-old child thinking about surrender when grown men should be standing up? Shame ain't on you, girl. It's on this town. But nothing changes if I fight. Mr. Mercer loses his ranch, you lose your forge, Miss Esther loses her shop. All for me. All for land I might not even got rights to." Caleb knelt down so he was eye level with her. "You listen to me, Ruby Caldwell. Your mama fought for that land. Homesteaded it legal, raised you on it. And when she was dying, she made sure you had proof, hid it in ink that wouldn't fade, even when everything else did. She fought, so we fight. But what if? No what ifs." His hands were on her shoulders, steady and warm. "March 20th, we're doing this. With witnesses or without. Because the truth matters whether folks see it or not. You understand?" Ruby nodded, but her face was still doubtful. Buck cleared his throat. "Got the forge ready. Been practicing temperatures all week. Cherry red, held steady for exactly 12 seconds. Any longer, and the paper starts to scorch. Any shorter, and the oxidation don't complete." He showed them an iron plate, marked with chalk lines. "This is what we'll use. Clean, flat, even heat distribution." Esther pulled Ruby's deed from her satchel, still wrapped in cloth. "I've been examining it. The stains are there, faint but consistent with lemon juice oxidation. If Lily used iron gall ink, as the Reverend said, it should react to heat." "Should." "Should," Caleb repeated. "Nothing's certain," Esther admitted. "But the chemistry is sound. And the date inconsistency Ruby remembered, that's solid proof even without the fire test." "If people believe a child's memory over legal documents," Buck added. The 4 of them stood in the cooling forge, the smell of coal smoke and iron hanging in the air. Outside, the sound of horses passing, voices calling goodnight, the ordinary rhythms of a town that had chosen not to see. 10 days, Caleb said. "We got 10 days. "And if Vernon doesn't show?" Esther asked. "He'll show." Caleb's voice was certain. "Man like that can't resist watching someone fall. He'll want to be there for it, want to see us fail in public." Ruby touched the cloth-wrapped deed with one finger. "What if Mama's words don't come back? What if the sun took him too far?" "Then we use the date proof. We use Reverend Morrow's testimony. We use every piece we got." Caleb looked at each of them in turn. "But we don't quit. Not now, not after we come this far." Buck pumped the bellows once, and the coals flared orange. "March 20th, dawn. We'll be ready." "Just the 4 of us," Esther said softly. 5, if the Reverend makes it back in time. 5 witnesses against a whole town's silence. Ruby's voice was barely audible. "Sometimes," Buck said, staring into the glowing coals, 5 honest voices are louder than 1,000 quiet ones. That's what we're betting on." They stood together in the growing dark, 4 people and a child, preparing to do something impossible, to make invisible ink visible, to make a forgotten child real, to prove that truth mattered even when no one wanted to see it. Outside, the wind picked up. Carried on it was the smell of thawing earth, mud and decay and the promise of things growing. Spring was coming, whether the town was ready or not. And in 10 days, they'd find out if truth could burn brighter than fear. Ruby took Caleb's hand. Her fingers were cold, small, but her grip was fierce. "I ain't giving up," she said quietly. "Not if you ain't." "Then we're agreed." Caleb squeezed her hand once. 10 days. We make ourselves visible, one way or another. The forge light flickered across their faces. 4 adults and 1 child, bound together by desperation and something that might have been hope, preparing to stand in the fire and see what remained when the heat burned away everything false. March 20th came cold and clear. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the eastern sky was turning pale gray, promising light. Caleb and Ruby arrived at Buck's forge in the wagon, the wheels crunching through frost that hadn't yet melted. Buck had been there since before dawn, stoking the fire until it burned steady and hot. The smell of coal smoke hung thick in the air, mixing with the scent of damp earth and horse sweat from the livery next door. Esther stood near the workbench, hands folded, face calm. Reverend Morrow paced near the door, his breath making clouds. And beyond them, standing in the street, scattered across the yard, leaning against fence posts, were people. Not the whole town, but more than Caleb had dared hope. Maybe 40 souls, drawn by curiosity or conscience, or the simple human hunger to see what would happen when impossible things were tested. Opal Finch was there, despite her earlier retreat, standing near the back with her shawl pulled tight. Deputy Trent leaned against a post, arms crossed, face unreadable. A handful of farmers, some women Caleb didn't know by name, not a majority, but enough. Enough to bear witness. Vernon arrived on horseback just as the first edge of sun broke the horizon. He wore his good coat, his hair slicked back, face composed. Behind him rode his 2 hired men and his cousin Ned from the courthouse. Vernon dismounted slow, deliberate, making everyone wait. "Mercer," he said, voice carrying across the yard. "Heard you were putting on a show this morning." "No show, just truth." "Truth," Vernon smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's see it then. Let's see this miracle you've been promising." Buck stepped forward, massive and solid. "My forge, my rules. This is how it works. I heat this iron plate to cherry red. Temperature I can hold steady. The girl lays her paper on it. We see what appears. No tricks, no chemicals, just heat." "And if nothing appears?" Vernon asked. "Then you win," Caleb said quietly. "But if words come back, if the deed's valid, you withdraw your claim. Here, in front of all these folks." Vernon's jaw tightened. "And I'm supposed to trust your word on that?" "Same as we're trusting yours." Caleb held his gaze. "But there's one more thing. Before we do this, I want folks to know about the dates." "Dates?" "Your guardianship papers. They say January 1886, but Ruby's father didn't die until April 1887. Caleb pulled out the copies he'd made. "Ruby wasn't orphaned in 1886. Her mama wasn't a widow. So how'd you get guardianship of a child whose mother still had a husband?" The crowd stirred, murmurs rippling through like wind through grass. Vernon's face went hard. "Clerical error. Happens all the time." 15 months off? Reverend Morrow stepped forward. "I witnessed Lily's deed April 12th, 1887, 3 days after the mine collapse. I remember because Lily was still in mourning. If her husband died in April 87, Vernon's papers claiming guardianship in January 86 are impossible." More murmurs, louder now. Vernon's hands clenched. "This is a distraction. We came to test the paper, so test it." "We will," Caleb said. "Just wanted folks to know what they're witnessing. A man claiming legal right based on papers that can't possibly be true." Vernon's face flushed, but he said nothing. He couldn't. Not without admitting the forgery or explaining the impossible dates. Buck turned to his forge. "Ruby, you ready?" Ruby stood near Caleb, small and pale in the growing light. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then bring the paper." Esther unwrapped the deed from its cloth, handed it to Ruby. The girl walked forward, each step deliberate, and stood beside the anvil. Buck had the iron plate ready, glowing the exact color of autumn leaves at sunset. Not orange, not quite red, cherry. "You put it down," Buck said gently. "Center it, then step back quick." Ruby's hands shook. She looked at Caleb, at Esther, at Reverend Morrow, then at the crowd, all those faces watching, waiting. Finally, she looked at Vernon, and something hardened in her expression. She laid the paper on the iron. For 5 heartbeats, nothing happened. The paper sat there, blank and mocking. Vernon's smile started to return. Then slowly, so slowly it might have been imagination at first, Brown began to appear, not uniform, but in lines, curves, letters forming like ghosts becoming solid. Someone in the crowd gasped. The letters darkened. Words emerging from nothing. Patent Deed, Section 14, Township 8, Range 5 West. More words. A name. Lily Caldwell, widow. A date. April 12th, 1887. And at the bottom, a signature. Witnessed by Isaiah Morrow, circuit minister. The paper smoked slightly at the edges, but the words held, visible, undeniable. Buck lifted the deed carefully, set it on the workbench to cool. The crowd pressed forward, everyone wanting to see. Reverend Morrow stepped up, examined the signature. That's my hand. I witnessed this deed April 12th, 1887. I stake my soul on it. The silence was absolute. Even the wind had died. Vernon stared at the paper, face pale. His mouth opened, closed. No words came. It's real, Opal Finch said from the back. Lord above, it's real. Other voices joined in. Can see it plain. The girl's got rights. Vernon's papers are wrong. Deputy Trent pushed through the crowd, looked at the deed, looked at Vernon. You want to explain how you claimed guardianship 15 months before this deed was written? Before Ruby was even orphaned? Vernon's composure cracked. The dates, there was confusion. Confusion, Caleb said flatly. Or forgery. You can't prove. The deed proves itself. The dates prove themselves, and every person here is a witness. Caleb's voice was quiet but carried. You forged those guardianship papers, Vernon, to steal a child's land, because you needed the money. Something broke in Vernon's face. The facade of righteousness, of legal authority, it crumbled, and what was underneath was desperate and small. I owed money, he said, voice cracking. $600, in Butte, gambling debts. They were gonna... He stopped, swallowed. I needed that $800, needed it to stay alive. The confession hung in the morning air like smoke. So, you were willing to take everything from a 9-year-old child? Esther said quietly. Her land, her inheritance, her future, to pay your debts. Vernon looked at Ruby, and for the first time there was something like shame in his eyes. I'm sorry. God help me. I'm sorry. Sorry. But I didn't have a choice. They were going to kill me. You had a choice, Ruby said. Her voice was small, but steady. You could have asked for help, could have been honest. Instead, you tried to steal from me, from Mama. She took a breath. And you made Mr. Mercer's life hard just 'cause you were mad about something that happened before I was even born. Vernon had no answer to that. Deputy Trent stepped forward, hand on his belt where his cuffs hung. Vernon Ashford, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and attempted theft. You got anything else to say? Vernon looked around at the crowd, at faces that had once smiled at him, deferred to him, feared him. Now they just looked tired, disappointed. I'm sorry, he said again, but quieter. Ruby, I'm sorry. She nodded once. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Trent led Vernon away, his hired men following at a distance. Ned Ashford had already disappeared, probably headed to pack his things before anyone thought to arrest him, too. The crowd began to disperse, talking in hushed voices. Opal Finch approached Caleb, face uncertain. I'm sorry, she said. She said, for refusing to help, for believing the gossip. I was wrong. Caleb nodded. Took courage to come today. Should have taken courage earlier. She looked at Ruby. Child, if you ever need anything from my store, anything at all, you come ask. No charge. That's a promise. Ruby managed a small smile. Thank you, ma'am. When the yard had mostly cleared, Judge Harlan arrived, late, but arrived nonetheless. He examined the deed, heard Reverend Morrow's testimony, took statements from Buck and Esther about the fire test process. This deed is valid, he said finally. Ruby Caldwell is the legal owner of Section 14, Township 8. Vernon's guardianship claim is voided due to fraudulent documentation. He looked at Caleb. As for you, Mercer, I'm ordering your widow's permit reinstated. Clerk Ashford had no authority to deny it. You'll have full grazing rights through 1890. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me. Thank that little girl for remembering dates, and thank whatever God you pray to for lemon juice and iron. Harlan tipped his hat. Justice is supposed to be blind. Sometimes it's just stubborn. Glad we got there eventually. He left. The sun was fully up now, warming the air, melting the last of the frost. Spring had arrived, final and certain. Ruby stood holding her deed, brown letters visible now, permanent proof of who she was and what she owned. Caleb stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder. "Is it over?" she asked. "It's over." "What happens now?" Caleb looked down at her, this fierce, brave child who'd survived starvation and abandonment and a legal system designed to make her disappear. "Now we go home, and we figure out what comes next, together." Ruby leaned against him, and for the first time in months, the tension went out of her small frame. "Together," she repeated. Around them, Buck was banking his forge. Esther was folding the cloth that had held the deed. Reverend Morrow was talking quietly to Deputy Trent about legal procedures, and the smell of spring was everywhere. Mud and new grass and possibility. They'd made themselves visible. They'd proven they existed. Now they just had to figure out how to live. The courthouse was warmer than it had been in February. Spring sunlight slanted through the tall windows, making the dust motes dance. Judge Harlan sat behind his desk, papers spread before him, while Caleb and Ruby stood on the other side. "The territories assessed your land at $800, Harlan said, looking at Ruby over his spectacles. "That makes you a wealthy young lady by Frontier standards. You'll need a trustee to manage it until you're of age." Ruby's hand tightened in Caleb's. "What's a trustee?" "Someone who looks after your money and property. Makes sure nobody takes advantage of you." Harlan dipped his pen in ink. "I'm appointing Caleb Mercer as your legal trustee. He'll manage the land, collect any lease income, and hold it in trust for you. That acceptable?" "Yes, sir," Ruby said quietly. "Good." Harlan signed the documents with a flourish. Vernon Ashford's been sentenced to 2 years in territorial prison, plus $500 restitution to be paid to your trust. His cousin Ned lost his courthouse position. They'll both be gone from this territory for a good while. He looked at Caleb. "Your permit's reinstated, backdated to January, so you don't owe any penalties, and I've made a note in the county records about the fraud attempt. Should keep anyone else from trying something similar." "Appreciate it, Your Honor." Harlan leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. Outside, a wagon rattled past, and somewhere a dog barked. "Off the record," Harlan said, "what Vernon did was despicable. But the system that let him do it, that's on all of us. We got too comfortable with paper being truth. Forgot that sometimes truth needs a little fire to show itself." He looked at Ruby. "You're a brave girl, Miss Caldwell. Your mama would be proud." Ruby's eyes went bright, but she didn't cry. "Thank you, sir." They left the courthouse with the papers tucked safe in Caleb's coat. The spring air smelled of horse and mud and the lilacs that were just starting to bloom near the church. Ruby walked close to Caleb, not holding his hand anymore. She was getting too old for that, or thought she was, but staying near. "Mr. Mercer?" she said after a while. "Yeah? Can we go see Mama's grave before we go home?" "Of course we can." The cemetery sat on a hillside, east of town, surrounded by a low fence that needed mending. Wildflowers were starting to push up through the grass, early columbines, the same ones that had been blooming when Ruby's father died. The headstone was simple. Lily Caldwell, 1851 to 1889, beloved mother. Ruby knelt beside it, running her fingers over the carved letters. Caleb hung back, giving her space. "I kept the paper, Mama," Ruby said softly, "just like you told me. And Mr. Mercer helped me make the words come back. You were right. It was important." She was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Ashford's gone now. Can't hurt us no more. The land's still ours, still yours." The wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and earth. "I'm staying with Mr. Mercer, if that's all right. He's been teaching me things, how to read better, how to write, how to count cattle. Says I got a good head for numbers." Ruby pulled a wildflower, twirled it between her fingers. "He ain't you, and he ain't Papa, but he's good to me, and I think you'd like that." Caleb felt something tight in his throat. He turned away, pretending to examine the fence, giving Ruby her moment. When she stood up, her face was composed. She tucked the flower into the earth at the base of the headstone. "Ready?" Caleb asked. "Yeah, I'm ready." They walked back to the wagon together. The sun was higher now, warming the earth, coaxing green things out of winter's grip. By the time they reached the ranch, it was midday. The cattle were out in the pasture, the barn door hung straight on its hinges, and smoke rose from the chimney where Caleb had banked the fire that morning. Inside, Caleb went to the shelf and took down his leather ledger, the winter count. He carried it to the table, opened it to the family section where Lucy's name was written, and below it, in pencil, the tentative entry he'd made weeks ago. Ruby Caldwell, winter 1889, survived. He picked up his pen, dipped it in ink, and carefully, very carefully, traced over the pencil. Ruby watched, breath held. When he was done, the entry was permanent, part of the record. He set the pen down, then wrote one more line below it. Ruby Caldwell Mercer, spring 1889, survived the cold. Ruby stared at her name, both names, Caldwell and Mercer, linked together, not erasing who she'd been, but adding who she was becoming. Am I really? If you want to be, Caleb said. Ain't legal adoption, not official, but it's family, the kind that matters. Ruby traced the letters of her name with one finger. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around Caleb's middle and held on tight. Her shoulders shook, and Caleb realized she was crying. Not sad tears, but the kind that came when something too big to hold finally found a way out. He held her, this child who'd been invisible and was now real, who'd been abandoned and was now claimed, who'd survived winter and found spring waiting. "Thank you," she whispered against his coat. "Thank you for not walking past." Caleb's voice was rough when he answered. "Thank you for waiting." Outside, the sound of cattle lowing. Inside, the tick of the clock and the crackle of the fire. And on the table, a ledger with two names written in permanent ink, proof that they'd both survived, that they'd both found home. The paper with the hidden words sat on the shelf now, framed in simple wood. Every so often, when the light hit it right, you could see the brown letters emerge, a reminder that truth was always there, even when the world said it wasn't. Sometimes you just had to apply a little heat. Folks ask me sometimes how I knew to fight for that girl. Truth is, I didn't know, just knew I couldn't walk past her twice. First time the town did it, shame on them. Second time, shame on me. Reckon a man's character ain't what he does when the law's watching. It's what he does when the law's turned its back. Ruby kept her mama's name, and took mine too. Caldwell Mercer. Said it reminded her that family's both what you're born with and what you choose. Wisest thing I ever heard from a 9-year-old. That deed, we framed it, hung it in the ranch house. Brown letters still visible if you hold it to the light. Reminds us both, truth's always there, even when the world says it ain't. Sometimes you just gotta apply a little heat. Spring came full that year. Lambs were born healthy, grass grew thick, and the creek ran clear with snowmelt. Ruby learned to rope a calf by June, could ride better than most grown men by August. She had her mama's gift with animals, that patience that could calm the wildest heart. We planted wildflowers on Lily's grave come April, columbines and lupine, the kind that come back every year without asking. Ruby visits regular. Tells her mama about the ranch, about school, about the life she's building. Some nights I sit on the porch and watch the sun go down over the mountains, Ruby beside me reading from whatever book the Reverend loaned her, and I think about how close we came to losing this, how close she came to disappearing into Vernon's schemes and the territory's indifference. But we didn't lose it. We fought, and we won. By God's mercy and a little girl's grit, we both survived the cold, and come spring, we were home.